Okay, so in preparation for 3.18, I decided to make sure I understand how some of my gems work. And one of those gems that I was eyeing was Cruelty. Um, so, let's take a quick look at Cruelty. Um, we are equipping a level 1 Cruelty here. It's a level 18 gem. I don't think it's been around for a very long time. It is 15% more damage with hits. And Cruelty has a base duration of 4 seconds, hit from sport skill, grant Cruelty. We're using Spark. Spark is very useful because it's a lightning skill, it hits, so we can support it with Cruelty, and it has a big damage range. Because one of the things we want to know is what's going to happen if we keep hitting with Cruelty. Right? And what are the things that really affect our damage with Cruelty as well? So base damage is 1 to 28, just level 1, but that means that we can do some creative testing. So let's go to the desecrated chambers. Alright, I'm gonna have to pop some flasks here, and we're gonna cast some cruelty. What we see is numbers like 22-ish. It's the number up on top. And the nice thing is we don't see the number fluctuate a whole lot. So that means that when we're hitting, relatively frequently, that 22 number that we get must, include some big hits and some really small hits, because the damage range we had is 3 to 70. So that means that it snapshots the highest percentage, and it keeps that in memory for 4 seconds, and there's effectively overlapping buffs. Which means that if you have a skill that has a very small hit percentage, like something that's supported by things that just reduce your hit damage, well then we still get the perk from Cruelty because we can use a different skill to get the Cruelty buff and get a big buff. Alright, next thing, what is affected by it? Let's look at controlled destruction. We'll put that in here. Let's see if we can see any differences in our Cruelty numbers. Flasks are full. Alright. The numbers we're seeing is like 23, 24. I mean, it's not like shockingly different. Let's run out of here for a second. Alright, so if we take control destruction out, we had 23, 24 before, and now what we're seeing is 22. So we do see a little bit of effect from controlled destruction on here. So that's nice. Alright. Now let's take a look at lightning penetration. Lightning penetration, 30% less lightning resistance as compared to 36% more spell damage. We should be seeing similar numbers, right? More than the 22s, more like the 24s. And the reason these numbers are super close together is just because 27, 26, some 24s. So we're seeing some 24s, 27s. We're actually seeing more effect from our lightning penetration than we saw from our controlled destruction. So that means that there is a resist part to the damage, right? Because if we see like 27s with lightning penetration and with controlled destruction, we see numbers that are significantly smaller. '24s. We're not gonna. 28. Well, that's a lot higher than we've seen before. Okay, well that gives us some more information. So, what that also means, because we just saw 28, and we saw some higher numbers before as well, is that controlled destruction seems to affect it, but more interestingly, there might be a critical component to this as well that affects it. So let's go pick up a... oh, wrong one. We'll just go to part 1 and pick ourselves up and increase critical strikes. So, increase critical strikes, 99%. We don't have a lot of options here, unfortunately. It is what it is. Act 10, desecrate chambers. Alright, let's see if having more crit does the trick. And if we start seeing some of these bigger numbers show up as well. Or more frequently, I guess. That's 25. So, judging from these numbers, it looks like critical hits actually affect our ability to do damage as well. Right, so what does that mean? If we have cruelty support and we are combining that with spark, we see that the hit damage, both from critical hits, as well as penetration, as well as spell damage, all of these different parts have an impact on how big our cruelty buff is. So let's find... do I have some here? Vicious ailments, swift affliction is not what I want. Right, where are you, buddy? There's a deadly ailment. Right, less damage with hits. You gotta be kidding me. Alright. Deadly ailments. 80% less damage with hits. Let's see what numbers we're seeing at this point. This should be a lot lower. Not too much lower just because of the scaling, but we definitely shouldn't be seeing 23s, 24s anymore. And we'll pop some flasks just to make life a little bit easier. And the numbers we're seeing are indeed like 16s, 17. Alright. So where does it leave us? Cruelty, when you're using deadly ailments, is not gonna work. Cruelty does snapshot. So if you have a skill that uses deadly ailments, and on occasion you hit with a different skill, which can benefit from cruelty, then you have a nice big cruelty buff that you can leverage for the skill that is supported by deadly ailments, which is nice. Also, the actual, skill, we're dealing at most 14 damage, is 1 to 14 damage. In maps, I think it gets up to like 90 damage. Wait, where's my damage? Spark. One to 14 damage. So these things don't hit very hard. But what we see is that even though it doesn't hit very hard, we can still get a pretty decent sized cruelty buff going. We also see that we can have an opportunity to make our cruelty buff from one skill, snapshot at a higher number, and then support another skill. So why does that matter? Well, cruelty could be a reliable way to get 40% more damage on a damage over time skill, that might be relatively hard to support. Right, so if we are looking at things like Cold Dot or something like that, getting a 40% more damage multiplier is difficult. So there might be an opportunity to use Cruelty as a way to trigger that. But then you'd of course need to have still something with a hit component, which most Cold Dot skills have a hit component, to provide the boost. The last thing I want to check is I want to see if they have a bug. I don't understand why right always gets everything. There we go. Righteous Fire. If we have Righteous Fire with Cruelty support, then we will not see Deadly Ailments or Cruelty support supporting the Righteous Fire. So we can't use it to buff Righteous Fire, but we could use it on Cold Dot skills as a way to do substantial damage. Okay, so that's it on Cruelty support. Let's take a quick look at what we have online. You're visible, so I need to hide this one. Nope. Okay, there we go. So what the wiki says, 15-24% more damage with hits. Neat. It has a base duration of 4 seconds, so if you are doing duration scaling anyway, it becomes even more feasible to boost your Cruelty with one skill and then use another skill for hitting. And if you're doing it for elemental equilibrium, for instance, then that could be a good option. And you have increased effect of Cruelty, goes up to 20%. The maximum buff is 40%. That lines up with what I've seen in maps. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that this is not a buff that grants you damage, right? Cruelty grants more damage over time with supported skill based upon the maximum life removed by the damaging hit. That looks like it's accurate because both criticals and resistances were affected by this. They have 4-second duration and the maximum effect is 40%. We have some calculations and it looks like people are not entirely certain where these calculations came from. And it's only Cruelty support, and I think it was introduced in 3.14. So that is, I believe, that a leak where we got a whole bunch of skill gems. So probably flew under the radar for a bit. Anyway, it is a interesting support. It could be quite useful for Cold Dot, right? This is a 40% more damage multiplier if you can gear it appropriately. Whereas if we compare that to efficacy becomes a 24% more multiplier. Not that great. Hypothermia is a 29% more cold damage over time multiplier. So it's a pretty good support gem if you can make it work for you. Anyway, that's some information on Cruelty. I'm looking at leveraging it in my build because I'm still looking at doing like a Cold Dot-ish mana bond Trinity, of not Trinity, elemental equilibrium type build, which is something that I played a very long time ago when elemental equilibrium was very different. But I think that I can still do it. It relies on agnostic, righteous fire, for my damage multipliers, and I think that I'm going to be leveraging Cruelty as one of my damage multipliers because I think I can get the numbers high enough and it makes it just a better support. Alright, that's all I had to say on this, and to show some of the testing and how it works. Now you know.